providing world-class plasma-derived medicinal products for more than a decade now. It aims to cater to the demand of immunological medicines worldwide to bring relief and longevity to the patients suffering from life-threatening diseases. This event has been organized under our academic initiative for the medical fraternity. It is a privilege for me to welcome all the attendees for today's webinar on behalf of Plasmagen Biosciences. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Neeraj Kumar Tulara for taking out time from his busy schedule and presiding over this webinar. Dr. Neeraj, who is currently practicing at Dr. L.H. Hiranandani Hospital, Mumbai, is a well-known critical care specialist having a rich experience of more than 20 years. He has completed MBBS from SMS Medical College, Jaipur. Then he pursued DNB in General Medicine from Jaslok Hospital and Research Center, Mumbai. His keen interest in intensive care encouraged him to pursue PG diploma in infectious diseases from South Wales University, Australia. He had been associated with reputed organizations such as Dr. Balabhai Nanavati Hospital, B.D. Patit Parsi General Hospital, Jaslok Hospital and Research Center, Mumbai, etc. Dr. Neeraj is a lifetime member in various societies like IMA, Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine, AIDS Society of India, Indian Society of Intensive Care Medicine, Cardiac Society of India, and many more to count. He has also been a part of auditing team for ISO, NABH, Infection Control Committee, CPR event analysis, and has played a major role of expert opinion as medical business analyst. Currently, he is actively involved in research on end-of-life care on ventilator patients sponsored by European Society of Critical Care Medicine. He has more than 15 publications in national and international journals of repute. Now I request Dr. Neeraj to share his presentation and address us on today's topic. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you and very good evening to all. You can see my slides.
Yes, Doctor.
Okay. Yeah. So, and thank you, Pooja, for the kind introduction. Today, we are going to discuss about the management of critically ill patient with the albumin. So, the people who work in the intensive care units, they know that the fluid resuscitation is the first gold standard guideline as soon as the patient arrives in the hypotension or the septic shock. So fluid resuscitation is one of the very important aspect of the the critical care medicine and of the management of the critically ill patients. And this fluid resuscitation can be done due to the crystalloids as well as the colloids. Crystalloids are very much in practice, and most of the people do with the crystalloids the fluid resuscitation. And after that, the patient failed to improve this fluid resuscitation, then they switch over to the inotropes and other medicines. So what is the role of colloids or the albumin here as a fluid resuscitation in the critically ill patients? And also there are many other indications where this albumin can be used, especially in the critical care practice. So if you see the type of critical illness, it can be anything, depending on your organs, your presentation, and all that. Could be starting from the the paralysis, neurological illnesses, muscular dystrophy, Alzheimer's, MNDs, PDs, terminal illness, encephalitis, meningitis, cardiomyopathies. So it could be, there may be a varied presentations of multiple critical illness we can see here. Now, what are the signs of critical illness? How the patient will present? These are the the first few slides just to give you an idea about define the critical patients whom we will be talking about the transfusing or resuscitating with the albumin. So the airways, you will see the evidence of the airway, upper airway obstruction, like patient is difficult to breathe, he's tachypneic, he's he's hypoxic, he's using his accessory muscles to breathe. Respiratory rate could be the tachypnea or the bradypnea. Okay, arterial oxygen saturation. If you do an IBG, if you check his SpO2 is less than 90. If you do his ABG, then it could be a PaO2 is less than 60. Heart rate, patient might be in bradycardia or tachycardia. with signs of impaired organ perfusion. Blood pressure, you may be having a hypotension most of the time, where the mean arterial blood pressure is less than 90. Perfusion, you may see the signs of impaired organ perfusion. So the cold, clammy skins, mottled skins with the, the increased capillary refill time more than 2 seconds. That shows that there's a perfusion to the end organs or perfusion to the peripheries is not good. So that shows the hypotension. Conscious level, patient might present with the reduced level of the consciousness. Patient might be febrile, and even the hypothermia is also a very bad indicator for the, the underlying sepsis. Hypoglycemia and the hyperglycemia, diabetic ketoacidosis is also one of the way how the patient can present in the critical care setting. Now, this is one of the early warning score by which you can identify which are the patients which may be, falling into a, the severe category of the illness. And these are the physiological parameters on the, the Y line: respiratory rate, oxygen saturation, supplemental oxygen, temperature, systolic blood pressure, heart rate, level of consciousness. And the more the score we see here, the respiratory rate, whether the oxygen saturations, and any supplemental oxygen, temperature, hypothermia, as I said already, BP less than 90%. So we need to see the scoring, and depending on that, then we identify the the early warning score on this. And according to this scale, the patient who has a score of 1 to 4, they have a low clinical risk of underlying sepsis or the critical illness. The red score 5 to 6, an individual parameter scoring 3, is a medium risk, and when the score is more than 7, aggregating all the parameters, physiological parameters, as we've discussed, then this risk is very high. The critically ill patient, as I said, the principles of management, so if you see how from the ABCDE, so first you take care of the airway, breathing, circulation, disability, and exposure. You do a complete assessment and reassess regularly. It's not the one-time assessment. Critical care is a very dynamic field. So you need to keep reassessing patient every hourly, not even hourly, maybe every 5 minutes or 10 minutes, because there are dynamic changes which can happen every minute. Even in a second, the patient can have a change which is very, very dynamic. You need to treat the life-threatening problems before moving to the next part of assessment. If something patient is obstructing, you need to intubate him. Patient is having some bleeding, or patient is having some major trauma, or patient is having any life-threatening problems. So first you need to secure that. First you need to assess that, then move to a second part. Assess the effect of treatment. Once you start the treatment, see whether the treatment is effective or not. Recognize when you will need extra help. If you need some extra help, that also you need to call for. Use all members of the team, communicate effectively. So you need to plan an approach how you want to treat this patient, manage this patient, and to aim of the initial treatment is keep the patient alive first. First, we need to save the patient and then achieve the clinical improvement. The patient is very sick. First, we need to make the patient alive. He should be alive first, and then we want to make him better. We want clinical improvement, and this will buy time for further treatment and making a diagnosis. Remember, it can take a few minutes for treatment to work. So wait a short while before reassessing the patient after intervention. So as soon as you start some medicine, it may not work immediately. You might need to wait for some time before you jump into some other type of treatment, and then reassess the patient, and probably you can have some other type of management or treatment. Prevalence of critical illness is a huge, anyone regardless of age or gender. There are a lot of population which is seriously ill in the ICUs. ICUs are never empty. You continue to increasing the number of beds, and they are always full. Every day, more than 1,300 Indians die because of the fatal diseases. And if you have seen, the low serum hypoalbuminemia is a common occurrence in critically ill patients, and this associates with the worst outcomes. A patient who present in the critical care setting with the hypoalbuminemia, they have a worse outcome as compared to the people who have the albumin levels normal or near normal at the time of presentation in the ICU. In a meta-analysis of 90 cohort studies, is found that there is a 137% increase in the risk of death, 89% increase in morbidity, and 70% increase in ALOS, which was related with each 10 gram per liter decrease in blood albumin concentration. The lower the albumin, the higher the morbidity, higher the mortality. This is about the human serum albumin, this synthesized exclusively by the liver. So liver is the only organ which, synthesize the albumin. And that's the reason when the patient has a liver cirrhosis, he continue to have hypoalbuminemia and related complications. And they need to continue to give transfuse albumin and the patient's liver is fired. Liver synthesizes 9 to 14 grams per day, and this released directly into the blood. We don't have a storage for the albumin, and only to 20 to 30% of the hepatocytes are committed. That's why even up to the 80% of the damage of the liver, people do not realize that the liver is having some issues, because 20 to 30% hepatocytes are the only committed towards the albumin synthesis. And once that get hampered, then you have a hypoalbuminemia and related complications because of all the, the oncotic complications. Regulation of production mainly by the osmolarity and the oncotic pressure of interstitial fluid in the liver, and it induced by the hormones insulin, cortisol, and growth hormones, and inhibited by the, the acute phase cytokines like IL-6 and TNF-alpha. That's the reason probably even the albumin can go down further. So hepatocytes may reduce the production or synthesis of the albumin because of these inhibitors like the IL-6 and TNF-alpha. And how it gets distributed? Almost 40% is taken by the intravascular compartment and 60% in the extravascular compartment. So synthesis 9 to 12 grams per day, and also it catabolized the entire amount. Is not get stored in the body. So the amount which is synthesized, the same amount get catabolized in multiple, the equations, multiple pathophysiological, the mechanisms. So plasma, when we see, the 40 grams per liter, and the interstitial which contains almost 11 liter of the, the body's fluid, it contains, the 50 grams per liter. So the total 40% is taken up by the intravascular and 60% by the extravascular. Under physiological condition, a steady state exists. So you have a 12 gram every day and you catabolize or metabolize 12 gram every day. Fixed proportion of albumin plasma concentration metabolized per day. And half-life is inversely proportional to the plasma albumin concentration. So if the albumin concentration content results, albumin concentration goes down, the half-life increases to reduce the metabolism. So ultimately we need to have a steady state metabolism so that, there is no hypoalbuminemia, no hyperalbuminemia, and catabolized in most organs of the body by the pinocytosis, uptake into the cytotic vesicles, ERs, and break down into the amino acids, and then further it taken into the plasma. Now, what are the albumin's physiological functions? One, the vascular, transport, and the metabolic. In the vascular system, it maintains the oncotic pressure. That's why when the patient is hypoalbuminic, he leaks from everywhere. He has a generalized anasarca. He has a lot of swelling because of the reduced oncotic pressure. It maintains the microvascular integrity, so there is no leakage. It maintains the integrity of all the microvessels, as well as maintain the oncotic pressure in the intravascular compartment. It transports various hormones, steroids. That they are linked with the albumin. The lower the albumin, the steroids hormones, they does not get transported well, and then there may be deficiency. Fatty acids, bile salts, bilirubin, calcium, magnesium, copper, zinc, and drugs also. Sometimes they are also dependent on their transport is dependent on the proteins or albumin, warfarin, diazepam. Metabolic, acid-base balance, take part in the acid-base balance, antioxidant, and the anticoagulants. So these are the few physiological functions what the albumin does, and how it is available of preparations of the albumin for the use. It is available in the 5%, 25%, and the 20%, the preparations. The solution of 5% human albumin have an osmotic pressure almost identical to that of plasma, and 20 to 25% of solutions are hyperosmotic. So the 5% albumin which comes is usually, usually matches the osmotic pressure of the plasma. So all the preparations contains 130 to 160 milliequivalent of the sodium per liter. So it contains good amount of sodium in the albumin. So almost 130 to 160 milliequivalent of sodium per liter of the albumin is there. So now the real question is that there is a clear association between albumin level and the severity of the underlying causes. As we have seen, the IL-6 and TNF alpha, they can inhibit, and then in the sepsis and other critically ill patients, the albumin goes down and it comes out with the worse outcomes. The real question is whether the relationship between the hypoalbuminemia and mortality is a simple association or cause-effect. So it's just directly related, or the cause-effect relationship. It is a cause-effect relationship. That makes perfect sense to use albumin infusions in critically ill patients to improve mortality, morbidity, and reduce the length of hospital stay. Therefore, it seems to be a good rationale for use of albumin infusion in the critically ill patient, because it's a causal cause-effect relationship, so that it becomes more prudent to use albumin as a infusion in the critically ill patients. So now we come to the today's topic about the albumin role in the management of the critically ill patients. Now, what are the conditions where this can be an indication, this can be used? There could be an acute condition like the hemorrhagic shock. Patient is having the loss of blood or loss of the intravascular the fluids because of some or other condition, where the albumin is used as a second choice when solutions of the crystalloids. So initially you give a crystalloids or the non-protein colloids, which are the first choice treatment, but you have used it without having produced a clinically adequate response, then you can move into the albumin. So first is the crystalloids, followed by the non-protein colloids, and then by the the albumin. Crystalloid and colloid solution must not be considered as a blood replacements when oxygen transporting capacity is reduced. So if the patient's hemoglobin is low due to the hemorrhagic shock, then the patient need blood, because the transport capacity reduced significantly due to the reduction in the hemoglobin. And then in that case, the crystalloid and colloids both are replaced by the blood products. Major surgeries, the use of albumin may be indicated in subjects undergoing major surgeries, like more than 40% resection of the liver, extensive intestinal resection, when after normalization of circulatory volume, the serum albumin is less than 2. The use of albumin in the immediate post-operative period is never advised for any other type of operation. So when there is a major surgeries like the liver resection or the intestinal resection, there may be a lot of the loss of proteins or albumins from the during the surgery, as it's a major surgery. And if the albumin is less than 2, then there is an indication of albumin transfusion. Burns, there is no indication in the first 24 hours in the burn cases, but that is in the period of the increased capillary permeability. But after 24 hours, albumin 5% is indicated using different doses according to the amount of body surface area involved. First 24 hours, probably, because there is a lot of, because the skin is the largest organ of the body, and when you have a significant amount of burns, then the skin, you lose a lot of water. So first you need to replace with the crystalloids to supplement that amount of loss. And later on, after 24 hours, depending on the surface area involvement, you can use albumin for the resuscitation. In the post-resuscitation phase, once the problem, the circulatory volume caused by the marked capillary permeability have been overcome, then the albumin 5% or 20% is infused at a dose of 1 to 2 gram per kilogram per day. If albumin is less than 1 gram or albumin 1 to 2 gram per deciliter, and the patient cannot tolerate an enteral diet, or has the massive tissue edema or pulmonary dysfunction, which could be aggravated by the low oncotic pressure. So if patient has this type of burns where the enteral feeding is not possible, okay, then also the albumin infusion can be given, especially if the albumin is less than 2, or if the patient has a lot of the pulmonary massive tissue edema because of the low albumin. Again, you need to give an albumin transfusion to increase the oncotic pressure. Heart surgeries, it can be used as a post-operative volume expander as a last choice of treatment after crystalloids or the non-protein colloids followed heart surgery. So again, in the heart surgery, the first is the crystalloids, then the non-protein, and then as a volume expander, it can be used if you cannot give the dose or you do not achieve a adequate clinical response. Crystalloids are the first choice for priming the circulatory in the case of the extracorporeal circulation. The association with the non-protein colloid can be preferable to avoid the accumulation of fluid in the pulmonary interstitium. Organ transplantation, albumin can be used in the post-operative period following liver transplantation in order to control the ascites and the peripheral edema and to replace the loss of ascitic fluid through the drainage tube. It is administered in the following circumstances: when the albumin is less than 2, pulmonary capillary pressure less than 12, and hematocrit is more than 30. So then you don't need blood transfusion. You can give albumin infusion to control the ascites in the liver surgery cases or the liver transplant cases. Acute conditions, again, the therapeutic plasmapheresis. Plasmapheresis is one of the most important indication is albumin, because that is what is bound to the plasma. The use of albumin is appropriate only for exchange of large volume of plasma, especially the plasmapheresis when it is done for, whether it is a myasthenia or other autoimmune conditions, TTPs and all. The more than 20 ml per kilogram in a single session or 20 ml per kilogram per week in successive sessions. So the huge amount of protein is or albumin is used in these plasmapheresis sessions. In the case of exchange of small volume of plasma, it is worth considering for cost-benefit reasons, crystalloid solutions or the association of albumin or crystalloids. When there is a huge amount of plasma exchange, the albumin requirement is very significant, and then it becomes a little cost effective. But when there is a small amount of plasma exchange or the moderate amount, then and if the cost is not an issue, then the albumin can be used as a plasma exchange program. Chronic states, those were the acute states where you can use in some settings the albumin. But the chronic states, there are many indications, especially the low albuminemia. It could be the liver cirrhosis with the refractory as one of the very, very common indication for which the albumin is used. Liver cirrhosis, refractory ascites, patient is having decompensated liver failure where you develop the ascites and which is refractory to the diuretics or the enteral feeding, then there is the use of albumin. There is so ascites not responsive to diuretics. Large volume paracentesis, when you do it, there is always a chance of precipitating hepatic encephalopathy. And to avoid that, you need to give, you need to replace the albumin, because you are removing a lot of proteins directly, immediately in few hours of time by doing a large volume paracentesis. HRS and the spontaneous SPPs, spontaneous bacterial peritonitis, also the albumin can be used. Ascites not responsive to diuretics. So the first treatment for the ascites, especially in the chronic liver setting, is the diuretics. In spite of increasing the dose to adequate or levels, if the ascites is not responding, so it is called an refractory ascites, and that is where you can use albumin. The patient who can gain most benefit from this treatment are those in the post-precarious clinical condition with the hypovolemia and ascites that respond poorly to diuretic. In these cases, albumin can be administered when the concentration of albumin even more than 2.5. Large volume paracentesis, as I've just said, is a choice in subject the refractory or the tense ascites. You do a total paracentesis or the dry tap, like more than 5 liters of, you do a tapping, which lead to hypovolemia and particularly unfavorable hemodynamic changes with the possible risk of AKI, with the possible risk of HRS, dilutional hyponatremia, and the rapid recurrent ascites with the, and the shortened survival. In order to reduce all those risks, albumin is used as a dose of 5 grams per liter of fluid removed. So if you remove, say, 5 liters of the fluid, you might need to use the 25 grams of the albumin in a single administrator at the end of the paracentesis. So you reduce the chances of these complications. And in this setting, because you don't want to give a lot of volume to the patient, so 20 or 25% albumin is preferable as compared to the 5%. HRS is in the setting of the decompensated liver function when the kidney is getting involved, and that is called the hepatorenal syndrome, where the chronic cirrhosis as well as the renal involvement. It is considered the extreme outcome of the hemodynamic dysfunction of cirrhosis, so that considered to be a bad cirrhosis, or it's uncontrolled cirrhosis, or the bad outcome in this cirrhosis. The deterioration in renal function can be rapidly progressive, type 1, stable, slowly progressive, type 2. The mortality rate of patient with the type 1 is very, very high, with a median survival of less than 1 month. So when the kidney functions rapidly deteriorates and patient goes into HRS, survival is very, very low. The treatment of choice is only the liver transplant. Medical treatment consists of a combination of the vasoconstrictors, okay, and like terlipressin and all, and high doses of albumin. That is what you can, buy some time while you are waiting for the liver transplant. SBP, this is a complication, again, chronic liver cirrhosis, a lot of ascites get infected because of the translocation of bacteria, and then you develop with the SBPs. And SBP is a common and severe complication of ascitic cirrhosis, and it occurs on almost around 20 to 30% of the patient. And it characterizes the spontaneous infection of the ascitic fluid in the absence of the abdominal source of infection. So you do not have any source of infection, but this sterile ascitic fluid get infected and can involve in about 30% of the cases, it can progress into HRS. Albumin in association with the antibiotic, because it's an infective cause. So you need to also add an antibiotic along with albumin, can be used in the treatment of SBP and reduce the probability of the onset of HRS as well as the mortality. Nephrotic syndrome, again, the use proteinuria, where you lose a lot of proteins from the urine. Short-term infusion of albumin 20-25% in association with diuretics is appropriate when the serum albumin is less than 2 with marked hypovolemia and or acute pulmonary edema or acute renal failure. Malnutrition syndrome, albumin must not be used for the nutritional purposes. The correct treatment is the enteral nutrition using peptide-based formulas or total parenteral nutrition. So usually you don't use albumin as a nutritional purposes. You use albumin as a, the purpose which we have mentioned here. However, the administration of the albumin can be useful in the patient with diarrhea who cannot tolerate enteral nutrition. So if the patient is not able to tolerate the enteral nutrition, the first line of nutrition is the enteral nutrition, followed by the total parenteral nutrition. Now, albumin can be a part of the total parenteral nutrition, but not the enteral nutrition. If the patient is able to tolerate the enteral nutrition, then the albumin is not should not be used for that purpose, for the nutritional purpose. But if the patient is not able to tolerate the enteral nutrition, volume of diarrhea is used more than 2 liters per day, serum albumin is low, and continuing diarrhea despite the administration of the short chain peptides and mineral formulas, it means it's not getting absorbed. And then patient will develop a lot of, the deficiencies and the dehydration, and no other cause to explain the diarrhea. That's the setting where you can use the albumin in this setting of the malnutrition. So human serum albumin, which we have talked, used as a resuscitation or the volume replacement fluid. Resuscitation of the critical ill patient in the ICUs, if you see, the intravenous fluid therapy is one of the most common intervention. Every patient on the IV therapies. Crystalloid, colloids, both are given. Colloids contain non-protein based and the protein based. Crystalloid fluids based on the normal NS and RN and all. Colloids, synthetic fluid, starch and natural such as the albumin, contain water and electrolytes, but the added component of the colloidal substances that does not freely diffuse across the semi-permeable membrane and remains inside the intravascular compartment, increases the oncotic pressure, helps in recovering the patients of the critically illness. Colloid can raise the intravascular volume quicker and using less volume than using crystalloid. Most of the patients cannot be given even the large volume also because of the most of the time involvement of the kidneys also and the oligurias also. So in that setting, you may not able to give a lot of crystalloids. So the patient do not respond, then the colloid need to be given. What are the advantages and disadvantages between the crystalloid and the colloids? Crystalloids cheap, accessible, colloids longer half-life, small volume required to expand intravascular volume. So you don't need to use a lot of volume when you are using colloids. Disadvantages, they are expensive. And because especially in the albumin, since it's a human product, there is a risk of allergic reaction, though not very common, because nowadays the purity is almost 100%. So the chances of allergic reaction is rare, but yes, it can happen. Disadvantage of the crystalloid, short half-life. So you need to keep giving. They do not remain into the intravascular compartment. Large volume required for the resuscitation. So you need large volume. They're very permeable. So come out of the membranes very fast, short half-life. So there is a trial about the human serum albumin used as a resuscitation fluid There's a heterogeneous group of critical care patients, around 7,000 patients from the 16 centers in the Australia, New Zealand, and 4% HSA versus 0.9% saline as a resuscitation fluid was, taken in both the arms, albumin as well as the normal saline, and primary endpoint is all-cause mortality. Similar outcome were observed in terms of the length of stay, duration of mechanical ventilation, and incidence of the renal replacement therapy. And subgroup analysis, if you analyze the subgroups in the same study, trend towards increased mortality, 13.6% versus 10. Post hoc follow-up study, patient who had a sustained traumatic brain injury at 24-month post-randomization, patient who received intracranial pressure monitoring, more intravenous interventions to treat raised ICP in the albumin group. Patient who ICP monitoring was discontinued in the first week after randomization, significantly more death in the albumin group. So there were both the arms, different subgroups were analyzed. In absence of the large randomized control trial, it seems prudent to avoid the use of albumin in the brain injured patient, because in the subgroup arm of the critically ill patient where the brain injury was there, the albumin did not do well. The patients had more complications in this arm. So it is prudent not to use albumin in the brain injured patients. So if you have patients who have a brain injury, probably we can avoid using the albumin because they do not do well. Sepsis, septic shock, administered albumin compared to saline did not impair renal or other organ function and may have decreased the risk of death. So this study says that albumin is maybe a more safer option as compared to crystalloids, especially if the crystalloids are not helping to achieve your goal, then or the patient is also having hypoalbuminemia, then the colloids, especially the protein colloids like albumin, can be of help, and it can reduce the mortality in some patients. In again this study, albumin Italian outcome sepsis trial. So this was again prospective multi-center randomized open label trial, and more than 1,800 critically unwell sick patients were taken. Two arms, 20% albumin as well as the crystalloids, and versus crystalloid solution alone. In this, they found that albumin group had significant lower 90-day mortality rates than those who received saline alone. So the saline, so crystalloid colloid combination versus the crystalloid combination, this combination works well as compared to when the patient used crystalloids alone. This was another study, Society of the Critical Care Medicine, and these are the guidelines which has come up from the USA. We recommend the crystalloid as the fluid of the choice. So fluid of the choice still remain the crystalloids for the initial resuscitation and subsequent intravascular volume replacement in patient with sepsis and septic shock. It's a strong recommendation, moderate quality of evidence. We suggest using either balanced crystalloids or saline for fluid resuscitation of the patient with the sepsis of septic shock, weak recommendation. They also suggest albumin in addition to crystalloids for the initial resuscitation and subsequent intravascular volume replacement in patient with sepsis and septic shock when patient requires substantial amount of crystalloids. So though it is not a very strong recommendation, but if the patient is requiring substantial amount of crystalloids, then there may be a use of the colloids, especially the albumins, to raise the intravascular compartment. We recommend against using HES. So if you need colloids, then the HES are not recommended. We suggest using crystalloids over gelatins. So even the gelatins as a part of the gelatins and the hetai starch are to be avoided as a colloid. And albumin can be used if the crystalloids, even after using substantial amount of crystalloid, the patient is not fully resuscitated as far as fluid is concerned. International guidelines surviving sepsis campaign for the management of sepsis and septic shock 2021. For adults with sepsis and septic shock, we suggest using albumin in patients who receive large volume of crystalloids over using crystalloids alone. Weak recommendation, moderate quality evidence. So though it is a weak recommendation, but in few patients, when the requirement of the crystalloids are very high, then the albumin can be used as a part of the fluid resuscitation. What are the other indications? Controversial evidence for use of albumin as a resuscitation fluid in the cardiac surgeries and the burn patient, as we have seen. It again comes after the crystalloids when the substantial amount is used. one patient, not in first 24 hours, but after 24 hours, the albumin can be used as a, the fluid resuscitating agent. Volume replacement in the cardiac surgeries. This was one of the study which was done to see the, as a resuscitation fluid about the albumin. And you can see here, so this was the European survey and multi-center unblinded control trial. And what were the conclusions they had given with this study? Albumin administration unlikely to cause harm in most of the patient. However, should be reserved for use in a specific group of patients in whom there is evidence of benefit. Hypotonic albumin solution should be avoided as a resuscitation fluid in patients with a traumatic brain injury based on the results of the SAFE subgroup analysis. So, especially the patients who are having a brain injuries, it should be avoided. Albumin should be avoided. Available evidence and the plausible biological rationale supports use of albumin in the patient with a septic shock when the substantial amount of the crystalloids is used and still the resuscitation is not completed. Chronic liver disease, it's a well-established use. The practice guideline grade 3 ascites, the albumin is used. Refractory ascites, large volume paracentesis, the albumin infusion of more than 5 liters, as we have said, already discussed, it has to be used. Hyponatremia in the patient with a cirrhosis and ascites. So you have a water restriction up to 1000 ml per day, and suggestion of diuresis recommended in the management of moderate hyponatremia. A more severe restriction of water intake with albumin infusion is recommended for the severe hyponatremia. So patient hyponatremia with the cirrhosis and ascites, the albumin can be used because it also contains salt. And if the patient is symptomatic, it's not purely a dilutional hyponatremia, but they are symptomatic due to the hyponatremia, then this could be one of the indication where the albumin can be used. SBP, as we have seen, along with the antibiotic, the albumin can be used. HRS with the AKIs in conjunction with the vasoconstriction like the terlipressin, albumin can be used. So these are the few indications where the albumin can be used. So what are the other important aspects about the, the human serum albumin indications where we can further use this albumin? So this, as we have discussed in the first slide, there are a variety of concentrations, 5%, 20%, and 25%. There was a systemic review by the Haynes and the colleagues to evaluate the efficacy and safety of the hyperoncotic as well as the hypooncotic. So 5% and the 25%. While albumin solutions are generally efficacious, less fluid is required when the hyperoncotic formulations are used, like the 20% and the 25%. Routine use of high percentage hyperoncotic albumin solution could avoid the potential risk of associated with the positive fluid balance, because we have seen like the most common indications like the cirrhosis where the fluid restrictions are there. So probably there the hyperoncotic albumin may be a choice here. Points to note: the albumin concentration chosen largely depend on whether other fluids, especially the crystalloids, are administered simultaneously or not. 20% albumin solution given simultaneously with 500 ml of normal saline solution is equivalent to 3.3% of albumin solution. So hyperoncotic albumin may be a better choice if edema is already present. So patient is already hypervolemic. So you do not want to load with the more volume. In that case, the hyperoncotic albumin, which contains a lesser volume, can be used to avoid any the extra volume to the patient. Also avoiding excessive sodium and chloride loads and their attendant complications. So you avoid giving extra volume as well as the extra sodium as well as the chloride. So these are the few indications in the management of the critical ill patient where the albumin can be safely used. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Any questions, then we can take up.
Thank you, Doctor, for your informative presentation. Now I invite the moderator for this webinar, Ms. Rekha Singh, to take the session ahead and request all the attendees to write their queries in Q&A section. Over to you, Rekha ma'am.
Thanks a lot, Doctor, for a wonderful presentation. Few questions are there, Doctor. Like, is albumin administration in acutely ill associated with increased mortality?
So I think I have covered in the my slides. So in the critically sick patients, okay, the albumin is not the first choice, even as the surviving sepsis guidelines. Okay, it has got a weak recommendation in the acute sick patients with the septic shock. But after using a substantial amount of the crystalloids, and if you are not able to use, or even the, you cannot use the Heta starch as well as the gelatin, because they are not recommended as per the guidelines to be used as a colloids. So in that case, when you have, the exhausted the substantial amount of the crystalloids, you still the intravascular compartment, you need to fill up, you need to increase the oncotic pressure. Probably that is where you can use the hyperoncotic albumin to increase the the oncotic pressure, which can subsequently give you a favorable outcome.
Okay, doctor, next question is this: when diuretics can be restarted in a patient with decompensated chronic liver disease with ascites and AKI?
So diuretics are the main treatment for the ascites. As soon as the patient gets decompensated means the liver is not able to compensate, and the patient develops the end stage liver disease complication like ascites, which is one of the complications. Now, when the ascites is there, the paracentesis is not the treatment of choice. The treatment of choice is the diuretics. And if the diuresis is adequate and the patient is not refilling the fluid very fast, in that case, nothing is to be done. The diuretics therapy continue to increase to keep the ascites in control. But if the ascites is not under control, or if the diuretic therapy is not, patient is not able to tolerate, or you have achieved the highest dose of diuretic therapy, or if also there is a hypoalbuminemia, in that case, if this refractory ascites and the hypoalbuminemia, then the IV albumin infusion may be one of the therapy, whether you use without paracentesis or with the paracentesis, then the IV albumin infusion can be used. Along with that, also, because when you have exhausted your diuretic therapy, then probably you can come to the albumin infusion and keep the albumin level more than 2.5 grams serum concentration. Then probably the refilling of the ascites may be a little less as compared to when you keep the albumin less than 2.5 grams.
Okay, doctor. Next question is: can albumin be used as a therapy for the hyperbilirubinemia?
No, so there is no role of the hyperbilirubinemia. There is no relation with the albumin and the hyperbilirubinemia. We have read all the indications, acute setting as well as the chronic setting. Hyperbilirubinemia means you need to find out the reason for hyperbilirubinemia, whether it is acute injury, chronic injuries, obstructive reasons, or parenchymal reasons, or whatsoever. As I've said, there are the 20 to 25% hepatocytes only take part in the production or the synthesis of the the liver in the albumin. So until 80% of the liver get damaged, the albumin production will not be hampered by the liver. So liver will continue to produce albumin. In that case, whatever damage happens and the hyperbilirubinemia happens because of the whether it is a hepatocyte damage or the other type of damage. But until there is a hypoalbuminemia, there is no role of giving the albumin infusion in the hyperbilirubinic patient.
Okay, doctor. Next question is: how many patients die due to lack of non-availability of albumin? Any stats on need versus availability?
So we don't know how many patients die, but yes, the lack of availability of the albumin is one of the the common occurrence. And because it's a human product, and there are many times the albumin is not there in the market. There is many times there is a shortage of the albumin, and it does not come because it is not, it cannot be produced everywhere. So it has to be outsourced from and it has to be produced in the specific laboratories and all that. So it's a highly product where you need to take all the precautions. So there is sometimes there is a shortage of the albumin, and we have seen many times that the albumin is not available, and we are not able to give the albumin. We use the plasmas and other things in those cases patients. Another reason is the cost. So especially in the remote areas and the other areas where the cost of albumin is very high, being a human product, the cost and the purifying product cost is high. So the many of the patients may not able to afford even if they require albumin. Third is the again the remote areas, the maintaining the cold chains and all that, it becomes a little difficult. So again, the availability may be an issue. So I do not know about the how many patients die, but yes, in the practical scenario, you may not get albumin available sometime, maybe because of the money, because you don't have a money, the patient don't have a money, he cannot afford, or it is not available because of the, the not access to, the proper city or proper areas. Or third, sometimes there may be a global shortage because of the, the non-availability of the product. So that can be their practical settings.
So doctor, next question is how effective albumin is in hemolytic disease of newborn?
Hemolytic disease of newborn, again, I don't think, because I don't have much experience about the newborns, but I do not think there is any, indications about the hemolytic diseases, because again, the hemolytic disease is an autoimmune type of disease, and then there is no role of albumin here. Albumin, is selectively used mainly in the diseases where there is a deficiency of the albumin, or hypoalbuminemia is contributing to the, either the increasing the complication of that particular syndrome or the disease. There the role of the albumin comes.
Okay. So doctor, next question is albumin and diuretics. Does the combination really work? And is so-called poor man's dialysis, is it true?
So it's not a dialysis, but yes, when you give, so why the patient passes more urine after giving an albumin, or why we give the diuresis, why we give a diuretic agent after giving albumin? 1, 2, because sometimes these patients are the hypervolemic. Even when we give 100 ml of 20% albumin, it can give a little the overload on the heart, because their heart also, they also have a the cardiorenal syndrome or the hepatocardiac syndrome. So in that case, first you need to offload that, that whatever volume you have given, because it's a hyper-oncotic the solution, which will give definitely increase the oncotic pressure suddenly, and the patient can go into a heart failure. So you need to balance that. Second, because of the increased oncotic pressure, the diuresis also may work well, and then you may have effective diuresis, and then patient's ascites can come down. So the sodium, sodium load will be preserved, and the ascites can come down after giving giving diuretic, when you give diuretics after albumin. But you cannot give the albumin repeatedly because of the cost and other issues. So it is to be given only the indication is when the albumin concentration, serum concentration is less than 2.5. So you achieve more than 2.5 in the cirrhotic settings, and before, if it is more than 2.5, you continue to give diuretics. Less than 2.5, you give an albumin transfusion and also continue to give a diuretic. But in the ascitic settings, usually the albumin to be used when it is a refractory ascites which is not responding to the diuretic therapy. So after even giving a albumin, the diuretic therapy may not be very, very beneficial. So in that case, you need to keep the albumin more than 2.5.
Okay, doctor. So next question is, what is the most effective method of minimizing hypoalbuminemia?
So most effective method of the minimizing hypoalbuminemia is you need to know the reason why the hypoalbuminemia is there, what disease he's having, whether the patient is, whether the intake is poor. So for any deficiency, there has to be 3 reasons. Either you don't eat, or you don't take inside. Second, it doesn't get absorbed in your body for some or other reasons. So there may be a, the absorption problem. There may be intake problem. Third could be a production problem. So the liver problems or other type of problems. So it is not getting produced properly. Fourth is a loss, like the nephrotic syndrome we saw. So you are losing a lot of proteins because the kidney is not able to filter it out properly. So in any of the 4 settings, whether it is an intake, or whether it is a the absorption, or it is a production, or it is a loss, when any of these settings are there, then probably you will end up with the hypoalbuminemia, and then you need to treat that setting. If the patient is not able to take, whether he has a lot of burns in the esophagus, or not able to take enteral feed and all that, and that's why the protein is going down, then you need to give him IV albumin. Patient is having a liver cirrhosis, so production has gone down, you need to supplement the albumin. The nephrotic syndrome, a lot of protein is going out, and patient is having a hypoalbuminemia. Related complications if are there, then you might need to give albumin infusions.
Okay, doctor. So, doctor, nowadays as COVID is very much prevalent, so how effective albumin is there in such cases as well, doctor?
So again, the COVID does not have, the as such resuscitation issues, because most of the COVID, once the COVID patient land into a sepsis or septic shock, then the management remains same, like we treat all the sepsis. So COVID sepsis is not something different from the normal sepsis or what sepsis or septic shock we see. It's the sepsis. We need to manage the sepsis as we manage with the guidelines. There is nothing new. And apart from the sepsis, there is no role of any crystalloids and the colloids in the COVID, because COVID is a viral illness, which is a self-limiting illness most of the time, and you don't need any therapy for that. So only until you land up into the complications and land up into the ICU or the septic shock, then you need to be treated as per the standard guidelines for the septic shock.
Doctor. So our next question is, doctor, what is an important predictor of morbidity and mortality in hypoalbuminemia cases, doctor?
No, so hypoalbuminemia is one of the important predictor of the morbidity and mortality. As I have said, that the patient who land up into the ICU or admitted into the ICU with the low albumin level as compared to the person who is having the same type of problem but with the good amount of albumin, the chances of survival is much more in the patient with the good amount of albumin as compared to the patient who presented with the hypoalbuminemia. Because if the patient is having a hypoalbuminemia and entered into the septic shock, it means this thing is going on since some time. So hypoalbuminemia will not happen in a day or two. So he might be having some chronic illness, some chronic issues by which the albumin has gone less than 2.5, and then he has presented with septic shock. So he's not having only one or other illness. He might be having some or other combined factor by which this hypoalbuminemia has occurred. While the patient who is presented with a normal amount of albumin, so that shows that his liver is definitely good, his kidneys are definitely good, so that at least he's not having multi-organ from before developing this sepsis or septic shock. So he has a good chances of survival or less morbidity and less mortality as compared to the patient who present with the hypoalbuminemia at the time of admission.
This is the last question, doctor. What is the role of enteropathy in the pathogenesis of hypoalbuminemia?
What is the role of enteral feeding?
Yes, enteropathy. Doctor, it is, what is the role of enteropathy in the pathogenesis of hypoalbuminemia?
No, I did not get the...
Okay. No worries, doctor. We will pass on this question. What is the role of enteral?
It is an enteral feeding he's talking?
Yeah, enteral feeding, doctor.
So, see, enteral feeding is always preferred type of feeding for the albumin replacement also. So there are a lot of peptides or peptides based formulas available for the increasing the albumin concentration in the blood. So the IV albumin is not the only way to increase the albumin in the blood. There are a lot of, the peptide or chain based formulas are there who can increase the albumin concentration in the blood. So enteral feeding is the preferred mode of feeding to increase the albumin concentration if the patient is not in very acute setting, like in the liver failure and all that, where you cannot give a lot of, because the albumin is so low and there is no production. So say if you talk about the liver, so even if you eat a lot of proteins, the liver is not producing proteins. So then you are always remaining into the hypoalbuminic phase. That is why you need IV albumin. But in the other settings, like the burns or sepsis or any other problems, if the patient can take an enteral feeding, you can always increase the high amount of protein or the protein-based formulas, whatever maximum he can tolerate to achieve the desired plasma concentration of the albumin. If that is not desired, that is not achieved because of some or other reasons, as I said that, even in the burn cases, though the albumin should not be used, but if the patient is having some burns where enteral feeding is not possible, in that case, the IV albumin to be given. Otherwise, the enteral feeding to increase even the albumin level is preferred if it can be given.
Okay. Doctor, one more question is there from Dr. Ajit Kumar. Investigation for diagnosis of less absorption.
investigation for diagnosis of less absorption. No, so that's a, you know, the different topic. So that's a malabsorption, you know.
Yeah, because he has to clarify how to diagnose there is a malabsorption.
Yes, so to diagnose the malabsorption, you know, you need to have a multiple parameters. Albumin is not the only one which shows the malabsorption. There may be, you know, there's certain type of deficiencies we need to look at, and after the deficiencies, once you establish that this patient is having a malabsorption, whether it is a albumin malabsorption, whether it is a, you know, the carbohydrate malabsorption, whether it is a fat malabsorption, there may be a different type of malabsorption. Once you establish the type of malabsorption, then you need to look at the intestines. What is, you know, why is not having why is having malabsorption? There may be some congenital anomalies where the patient is not able to absorb the things properly, celiac disease and celiac 2 and all that. So there are the different types of test investigation, different type of test, different type of profiles while which the patient might be having a malabsorption. So we need to, you know, depending on the patient profile, need to start investigating for, you know, the malabsorption. Albumin deficiency is one of the, you know, the one of the component of malabsorption. Malabsorption is a whole syndrome which contains, you know, the multiple type of deficiencies, multiple related to the reduced absorption from the intestines, which may be adaptive, which may be congenital, which may be because of diseases, which may be because of any sepsis, which may be because of any other factors.
Thanks a lot, doctor. Now all questions we have finished. Now over to you, Pooja.
Thank you so much, Rekha ma'am. I would hereby like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Neeraj for delivering such a pragmatic and informative talk. I also thank all the participants for making this webinar successful. With that, we come towards the end of this webinar. I, an entire team of Plasmagen Biosciences, signing off here. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night.